And welcome to another episode of Mysterious Forces Live. Here I am again, still at the International UFO Congress 2019. We're here in downtown Phoenix, Arizona, and I'm with Dr. Michael P. Masters, who has written an interesting book. It's Identified Flying Objects, a Multidisciplinary Scientific Approach to the UFO Phenomenon. And I know that the people who watch this show know that I'm oriented towards nuts and bolts and evidentiary types of UFO research. And once I had read a description of his work, I asked Dr. Masters to come over and talk because I want him to explain what his book is about, and so everyone else can catch on to this idea too. I know we've talked about these types of theories before on the show, and we've had other people on the show, but I think Dr. Masters is kind of encapsulating this idea in a unique way, and I'm happy to have him here. Welcome, Dr. Masters, to Mysterious Forces Live.
Thank you. It's great to be here. Thanks for having me on.
And I'll go ahead and hand you the microphone and let you explain what your book is about and the basis of your research.
All right. The overall model is that rather than being from a different planet, coming across space to study us in a different solar system, that UFOs and these alien beings are actually us in the future, coming back through time to study their own evolutionary past. So if we look at long-term changes in hominin evolution, with the most dominant trends being an increase in brain size, a rounder skull, a smaller face, bigger eyes. If those things continue into the future, we're likely to resemble sort of your quintessential alien form, specifically the Greys, the Nordics, the individuals with more East Asian looking characteristics. And so it basically takes a conservative approach to this model. It is a testable hypothesis because it makes a prediction about a future human condition, and just by simply continuing to exist we would know whether or not that's true. And just synthesizes research from physics, astronomy, astrobiology, and obviously anthropology to sort of build a case around what I refer to as the extraterrestrial model. So looking at them as us, humans, just from a future time.
Do you think along the evolutionary path that there are particular demarcation lines in our evolutionary development that you can point to where you think perhaps there was some intervention at some point?
Well, I mean, my Ph.D. research looked at long-term trends in human evolution and really specific, mostly craniofacial anatomical traits, how those change over evolutionary time. And in looking at it, there was an acceleration, but it was a pretty continuous acceleration, and there's not necessarily a specific time where there was a jump. I mean, you can see this long, slow progression, but it's not, there aren't really any discrete periods within our evolutionary past where you have something that could be considered anomalous. And it would seem from the current interactions, the sort of covert operations of these extraterrestrials, that they're not really trying to interject themselves or impose themselves too much on their own past. And it would almost seem to be more of an observation type thing, like, and it could be my own biases as an anthropologist that they're coming back to study us. But if you look at many of these reports of abductions, the things that take place are almost identical to what I would do as an anthropologist if I had access to time travel technology. I would take hair and skin and fecal and gamete samples to understand our evolutionary past. So I think it's probably more of a research mission rather than really trying to influence the future to cause change in the sense of how we think of the arrow of time.
Yeah, I like that. I myself had, just imagined this hypothesis on my own, because I love this topic. And I can't help but think that some of these evolutionary changes look like what might occur during prolonged life in space, and that the thin bodies that don't have a lot of musculature but have a very large brain, have very large eyes for taking in light, might be the result of having to live in space. And I've wondered if in the future we had had to leave Earth at some point, perhaps due to climate change or some other catastrophic event, and then they would have to come back once they had the technology to recover DNA to maybe cure some illness that they may have in the future or restore some part of their humanity that they've lost over time. Do you think that's a possibility?
Yeah, absolutely. And mostly what I base the book on are very long-term trends.
Okay.
So I mentioned the craniofacial anatomy. There's more recent ones, especially since the origins of agriculture about 12,000 years ago, the Neolithic Revolution. As we domesticated ourselves, we start to see some changes in association with that also would appear to be leading us toward these archetypal alien forms. But in looking at the long-term evolutionary changes, we know those. We can see that. That's our past. And they're very observable in the fossil record and in looking at recent human evolution and human variation. But once you start looking forward, because we can't yet see the future, we just can't know. And so I try to avoid any sort of speculation about what might happen to us between now and then that might give us those characteristics. But you're right. If we were forced to live in space or on a different planet, there's certainly going to be things that enact change within our morphology, behavior, culture. So I don't really try to think about what those might be, but there are certainly things that could happen. And with regard to your question about genetics, that's actually been reported a number of times. People that have had close contact, that receive information, many have been told directly that they come from our future. Within that context, those and others have been told that it's to sample chromosomes or genes from the past because they are having problems in the future. And that could very well be because we overstepped our boundaries and started to try to play God with our own genome and, maybe try to fix a disease here, but we caused this latent effect here. Sod's law, Murphy's law, you try to fix something, you cause some other problem. So it's certainly possible. And it would make sense, even in the context of current trends toward genetic homogenization, where all of these different groups from all over the world that used to be separate, isolated, interbreeding populations are now all becoming one global human population. And that could lead to problems with global inbreeding, global incest, essentially. So it would certainly make sense, based on current trends and past trends, in conjunction with many of these reports, that could be a valid reason why they're doing this.
Right. And I just want to point out, and I respect that so much, because researchers such as yourself and Richard Dolan and even David Paulides, these are different disciplines, but I like researchers that will say, look, I'm sticking to the evidence and the facts and what I know I can talk about. And at least when you do use speculation, you set that aside and say this is speculation, because people like myself who tend to be consumers of this type of information, we automatically kind of absorb the information and then we start to speculate because it sparks the person's imagination. Yeah. And so there are so many different pathways that this could take and so many different possibilities. You can't help but your imagination just fires off on what this could be. Do you support the idea, even if it is speculation, that there's a hybridization program going on, or do you think this is strictly a kind of a research in the way that we do research on different species?
Yeah, that's an interesting question, and I agree with you. It's important to separate evidence-based claims from speculative claims, and I think we need more of that in the UFO community. I think we as researchers should be held accountable, and we should hold accountable those that are listening to these claims. And we all need to take a more grounded approach, I think, and that's important. But the question of hybrids is interesting. One thing I like to argue is that based on our definition of a species, the biological classification of species concept, if there is actually hybridization taking place, they would have to be human. There's no way an organism could, or it's very, very, very improbable an organism would evolve on a separate planet, develop in a way with their unique evolution, their unique gravity and distance from their sun, to look so much like a human and to be able to interbreed with the human. We're not even able to interbreed with our closest living relative, the chimpanzee, and produce viable offspring. So I think if people do believe in hybridization, it's also important that they recognize that those would have to be humans or some relatively closely related member of the hominin lineage. And based on their characteristics, I would argue that they would be future members of our lineage. But simply for that to take place, whether it's happening or not, there's been a number of reports. I've met people who claim to be hybrids. And what's interesting is the few that I've met all seem to have really interesting cognitive abilities. Precognition is a very common one. Sort of rudimentary telepathy is a common theme as well. So I think it's just my own belief, personally. I can't know this for sure, but I do think that there is probably some sort of hybridization happening, whether it's systematic, it's being done intentionally. In almost every abduction case, they are sampling sperm and egg, and there's been reports of fetuses and gestating babies and things like that. So clearly there's an interest in reproduction and fertility, fecundity. And yeah, I mean, if we're able to do that because we share our humanity, there could certainly be the potential for hybridization.
Do you think, and we'll bookend this, I have a question to kind of wrap this up. Do you think we're on the precipice of some dangerous science right now with things like CRISPR out there and Chinese scientists kind of going rogue and doing experimentation with the human genome kind of outside the bounds of accepted mainstream science or academia? And could this be somehow a triggering event for unforeseen negative consequences in the future?
I hope not. But I guess that's possible. The more we try to manipulate our genome or just do things we don't fully understand, we set ourselves up for potential catastrophes. The whole eugenics movement should be a lesson learned. Trying to find what we deem to be, culturally at least, the ideal human sets us up for all kinds of potential problems, simply because when you limit the gene pool, you get rid of the variation that's so important for our adaptability and the forces of evolution that can help certain individuals survive. If you narrow the bell curve and you narrow that gene pool through the eugenics movement, you're potentially setting up your entire population for catastrophe. So yeah, I think it is important that we be careful, and there are regulations in place. You're right, in some countries those aren't enforced as much. But yeah, I think if we continue to maintain regulations with regard to really on a large scale at least manipulating our genome, I think we'll be okay, at least until we fully understand what could happen. And we have other animals that we can test these things on. The human genome's more complex, relatively speaking, so it may not translate perfectly. But I also think that human curiosity could get the better of us, where we just really want to know what the outcome of something would be. And especially like we were talking about earlier, if we can prevent diseases, if we can cure congenital diseases through the manipulation of our genome, why wouldn't we try to do that? But what might happen? What are the ramifications of that? So yeah, I think it's important to find a balance, and I'm hopeful that humanity will continue to learn, but do so in a relatively reserved way, and at least be cautious of potential problems that could result.
Well, Dr. Masters, I appreciate you taking the time out of your busy schedule to be here. You're a vendor here. Are you doing a lecture as well?
Yeah, I did a lecture. Oh, okay. It's in the past now. I did. Yeah, it was yesterday, Thursday at 2 o'clock. But yeah, no, I'm done with that. Just hanging out, talking to people one-on-one now in the vendor area. I've got a banquet tomorrow, so I'll be around until Sunday morning.
And go ahead and tell everyone where they can find your book and your website.
Yeah, I have some copies, hard copies here at the vendor booth, but If for those that aren't at the show, it's available pretty much everywhere. Amazon, Barnes & Noble. There's an audio book on Audible and iTunes, Google Books, Apple Books. There's ebook.
Do you have any other public appearances coming up?
I just got invited to give a talk at Contact in the Desert, so that'll be in May, I guess. But it seems like festival season's kind of winding down at this point. But yeah, here in May, I'll be at that one. I've never been, but I've heard it's a pretty fun event. Yeah, so I'm looking forward to that, and may give a talk here or there at some point. But yeah, it's just happy to be here. This is a really fun event. It's my first time here as well, so.
Awesome. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us. The book is Identified Flying Objects, a Multidisciplinary Scientific Approach to the UFO Phenomena. The author is Dr. Michael P. Masters. Thank you so much for stopping by, and thank you for stopping by and spending your time with us here at Mysterious Forces Live. Once again, we're at the 2019 International UFO Congress right here in Phoenix, Arizona. Thank you for stopping by. If you haven't hit that like button, if you haven't hit that subscribe button, please do so. And don't forget to share the video. This information's no good if you just keep it to yourself. So let's share the information and get the word out on this important research. And I'm hoping that you'll come on my regular studio show at some point and we can have a deeper conversation, because I love this topic and I know that there's so much more that we could talk about.
Let's do it.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Masters. Thank you for watching. Everybody take care, and thanks for tuning in to Mysterious Forces Live.